I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
Free agency is only 3, maybe 4 days away. I guess the floodgates open up at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. Central Time on June 30th. I can't remember exactly, but they modified that. So all of the free agency news wouldn't be coming out right at midnight and people wouldn't have to stay up. It still kind of ends up subsequently being a night to stay up for. If you remember a few years ago, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard both ended up going to the Clippers, or that news was essentially announced at like 2 a.m. Of July 1st the next day, even though free agency had opened up earlier. So it's always a time to stay, tuned in, plugged in, and dialed in. But all the, sort of background workings of free agency and the inner workings that nobody's hearing about because of the collective bargaining agreement that's still currently under place in the NBA, which has very, very stringent protocols in regards to there being no communication in regards to contracts or anything before July 1st, even though that we know that still persists in basically almost all applicable cases. But besides that, everything will officially come to the forefront here in a few days. And me and Jaren are going to be on top of all the Mavs free agency coverage for you guys. But obviously, we wrapped up our draft coverage the other night. It was really exciting. You guys can go check everything out. We have the live stream posted up on our Twitter, as well as our YouTube, as well as our post-draft pod, our sort of immediate reaction to what the Mavericks did, trading with the Kings to get the 24th pick, en route to taking on Richaun Holmes' expiring contract, and also, of course, trading back from 10 to 12, and then, shedding off of Davis Bertans' salary, and then selecting Dereck Lively at number 12. And of course, at number 24, they got Olivier-Maxence Prosper. And even after the draft, they made a couple moves, getting one of the more coveted undrafted free agents in this class, and Mike Miles Jr., homegrown guy out of TCU, also getting Conference USA Player of the Year, 5'11" guard out of UAB, Jordan Walker. So they're out here already building a summer league god squad, but in the instance of Prosper and Lively, these are two guys that could be ready, sort of tried and true rotation players at the start of next year if everything goes right. So we're obviously going to put a bit more of a spotlight on them and really dissect their games. Me and Jaren will talk a little bit about Dereck Lively's role and stuff like that today, and just kind of how we project these guys. We obviously already did the Dereck Lively profile because he was in the range that the Mavericks were selecting in pre-draft. So you guys can go check that out. We're not going to dive too deep into who he is as a player so much. We'll definitely cover it at a surface level. But we do want you guys to go listen to that profile. If you want to find out more about that, you can find it, a few podcasts down from this current one. I believe it was maybe a week or two ago, Dereck Lively draft profile. That'll give you really good insight into who this guy could become for the Mavericks. What a lot of analysts and talking heads within the Dallas media, kind of pencil in that Tyson Chandler 2.0 comparison. Go check that podcast out to, find out why that is the case. But in Olivier-Maxence Prosper's case, Jaren and I obviously didn't have, too much of an opportunity to do more than mention his name and kind of, just give sort of a brief sort of introductory as to who he is as a player in one of our pre-draft podcasts, where we kind of talked about the Mavericks options if they were to trade back. And obviously he wasn't really in that sort of 10 to 15 range, that, immediate range that we thought they may trade back in, potentially with the Hawks or some other team. He was a much kind of further along in the draft. So we will be doing a full-fledged player profile on him, dissecting his game, offensively, defensively, talking about NBA comps, and, also putting a pretty big highlight on his role. We'll talk a little bit about the, two-way signing of Mike Miles Jr. We don't know who's going to be on the other two-way spot for the Mavericks as of yet. Of course, last year to end the season ended up being McKinley Wright IV and AJ Lawson. We don't know if it's going to be a scenario here where one of those guys returns as a two-way, or, they get upgraded to a main roster spot, or if any of those guys don't come back. It's going to be interesting to see for sure, but we do know, Mike Miles does have that 1-2-way filled up unless something is to go haywire, here in summer league and training camp. So definitely try to dive into him a little bit. Jaren watched a lot of Big 12 basketball last year, so he will definitely be a little bit more well-versed in that dude than I am. But Jordan Walker is a guy that we kind of need to dive into a little bit more, but we'll talk a little bit about his game as well today. Of course, a smaller sort of guard that, has that sort of Trae Young, Steph Curry-esque kind of play style to him, to where, he's a real punisher from outside. And, he, unlike McKinley Wright, a guy who's also that size, this guy definitely epitomizes the, having to have a really good outside shot given his size. He understands that that's going to be something he has to have in his toolbox, given his height and stuff. And, the Mavericks are kind of running thin on guards right now, outside of Luka and Kyrie, in terms of, those playmaking types. Obviously, Jaden Hardy is a good shot creator, but the playmaking still kind of has some ways to go. So to see if any of those guys, sort of slip through the cracks this season and end up contributing to the rotation at all would be interesting. But I believe Jordan Walker, as of right now, as it stands, is just kind of a training camp invite, exhibit 10 guy. So, we're definitely going to need to see more in summer league before we get anything definitive on them. And we won't be doing like full-fledged player profiles for those guys, but, after summer league, when we have a more definite understanding of their sort of spot on the team, we definitely will be doing player profiles for them. And, even so, we'll definitely try to at least get into their games a little bit more than, just at a surface level. But that, obviously we'll go over all that sort of stuff, and we'll sort of have a quick debrief at the end over some of the quotes from yesterday's post-draft introductory press conference, where the Mavericks introduced, Olivier-Maxence Prosper, of course, and Dereck Lively. It wasn't the most fruitful interview, definitely one that was very exciting, though, and up the ante for these guys, as well as the anticipation for when they get to Dallas. But surprisingly, I mean, despite how young they are, these are, two very high character guys, seem very well vetted in the interview process. So, there wasn't really too much room for discussion on any, sort of answers that they gave, or any even sketch answers for that matter. So there's not really a whole lot to dissect, except from the hype and excitement, part of things, which we'll definitely get into because it is an exciting time. And besides that, that'll kind of do it for today. And we'll also have another podcast coming out later to kind of wrap up a lot of the free agency rumors. Trust me, we are not neglecting this whole sort of, Mavs almost trading for DeAndre Ayton saga. We'll be divulging into that, as well as some other rumors that have sort of, kind of came out of the canister the last few days, that the Mavericks have kind of been thrown around in. They've definitely, I feel like, been in a lot more leaks than the last year or two. So it's the best time of the year. We should have the, it's the most wonderful time of the year, Christmas music going right now. But unfortunately, the 4th of July is upcoming, Jaren. How did the 4th of July and basketball sort of go together around this time of year, Jaren? Is it an exciting time?
Yeah, I mean, 4th of July involves fireworks, barbecues, meeting some cool people, and similar to basketball and, the July 1st, or I guess June 30th this year, start date for free agency. You know, we're going to be meeting some new players,
A lot of
having
fireworks
hopefully
too.
some fireworks with some
Yeah.
trades, and we're going to be eating good because we're going to be celebrating all the guys we're getting in. So that's the whole
Yeah.
I guess direct correlation between the two.
Yes, I mean I can go on for hours, you know, in our intro here, but I think Jaren has the perfect way to sort of sum up everything. So we're just gonna go ahead and forward here to the ad break. This is gonna be an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters, and we will catch you guys after the break. All right, Jaren. So obviously, already from the sort of post-draft process with all the interviews and everything, as well as the press conference, Olivier-Maxence Prosper, or Omax, as he's more, you know, easily or favorably called, is already seemingly, you know, a fan favorite. He's pretty beloved by fans and teammates alike. It seems, even from his time at Marquette, seems like a great locker room guy, very high character, very high charisma. Jaren, what are the Mavericks getting in this individual here?
Yeah, you know, obviously, I think early March is whenever the big, or not the Big 12, the
Big
Big
10.
East, I think is what their conference
Big
is called.
East, yeah, my bad.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Big East. Yeah, is
Big
whenever
Ten's
their
salt,
conference tournament.
basically.
Yeah, that's whenever their conference tournament was going on, and Nico Harrison and other Mavs executives, of course, went to that tournament looking for, you know, guys that would possibly be on the undrafted market board, and he was one of the guys that kind of stood out to them. Now, slowly and, you know, surely, he built up his draft sort of, I guess, stock. And over those last, you know, few weeks leading up to the pre-draft process, he quickly became a first-round pick. I think, you know, once the Mavericks saw that, you know, pretty much it was a lock. And I think, you know, personally, that's just a sort of only kind of, I guess, a description of the character. I mean, he's a guy who's going to work hard, come in there day one, probably become a defining figure in that locker room, like we've already seen him become with the fans. You know, he's quickly risen up my likable Mavs guys. You know, I don't really know where he is on that list, but he's quickly rising up that list. And yeah, obviously, you know, he's a high character guy, only 20 years old at the current moment. He's going to turn, I think in 6 days, he's going to be 21. And yeah, I mean, he's a hardworking guy, high motor. He does all the intangibles right. That's kind of how he marketed himself in that pre-draft process, was a guy who would go in there, get the rebounds, get the hard effort plays, you know, dive on the floor for the extra balls. He was going to be the guys that were, you know, the hard-nosed, defensive-minded kind of guy. And, you know, that's a guy that the Mavericks really do need. I mean, I think he's standing at 6'8" with shoes on. So basically 6'8" whenever he's on the court, with a 7'1" or 7'3" wingspan, if I remember right.
Yeah, 7'1".
Yeah, 7'1". Yeah. So, I mean, he's a lengthy guy, something that the Mavericks do need as well. And very, very defensive minded, as I said earlier. You know, very good length, makes him very guardable, 2 through 4 pretty much. I mean, if you really want to, if he could build up some muscle, maybe a 5, not really, but there's a possibility of that. You know, there is a lot of raw potential there, you know, especially on the offensive side of things, but defensively, you know what you're going to get. And in the Big East, I mean, he guarded the top of the top guys, Jordan Hawkins, Colby Jones. I mean, there's a few other guys that I'm missing here, Cam Whitmore, and limited to them to some very, very, you know, sort of good numbers. I mean, I think Cam Whitmore was like 3 for 14, and Jordan Hawkins was like 5 for 16 or 5 for 17 whenever they played UConn and Villanova, of course. And, you know, those are very two high, you know, remarking guys, especially on the offensive end. He was the primary ball defender on those guys and, you know, limited them to, of course, those numbers. So you know, I think that we are going to get a very defensive minded guy, which is what the Mavericks, of course, needed. And very complimentary guys. I know that we're going to talk about Dereck Lively a little bit more, but not as much as we did in that the player profile. So, you know, one of the things that they harped in the interview process was sort of, you know, that these guys were going to be complimentary guys. You didn't need the ball in their hand to sort of produce anything. So I think putting them alongside, hopefully Kyrie and Luka, will definitely, you know, kind of produce, and we'll see what they can be their rookie year. But I mean, the blueprint's there. I think, you know, there is a potential there that he could probably work his way up into a defining role. I know that we'll get into this a little bit later, but I mean, the potential's there. So I guess you'll carry on with some of the more intangibles. But yeah, I mean, definitely defensive minded. From what I can see, a very high character sort of individual.
Yeah, this is a guy that was definitely a benefactor of the pre-draft process, as you mentioned. He had a really good NBA Combine. He tested in the top 5 of both of the vertical jump categories, I believe, 36.5 inch standing vertical, as well as a 40.5 inch running vertical. Obviously was able to bolster his stock up as well in the some of those pre-draft interviews. So he's very hardworking. I think he's definitely a guy that maybe, was as low on some draft boards as he was, just simply because he did play in the Big East last year. And, he's sort of a late bloomer. He's improved, steadily from his freshman year at Clemson to where he then transferred to Marquette his sophomore year. But by no means was he really being even coveted as an NBA draft prospect, going back a year or two ago. It was definitely something that he, could manage, obviously, and he's obviously been able to make himself a first round pick pretty amazingly here, which, really shows his work ethic and dedication, to just being more offensively and defensively savvy and sound. But, this guy definitely even came into college a lot more raw than he is, and he's had to kind of work for everything that he's got. So to see him have got to the place that he has, especially with, the athletic toolbox and, just some of his length and his size and everything like that, it's very promising just in terms of his potential. He's not as raw, I think, as some people would probably, may attest in terms of how raw he is at first. I definitely think that he does have, some of those intangibles that make him a little bit more unique. From that wing spot, his ability to cut, his ability to attack downhill really hard, specifically, either off closeouts or, just the catch. He's a really good finisher, absorbs contact really well. He's definitely not just one of those, really rangy, raw, lengthy prospects that doesn't have anything, as far as offense or, defensive strength goes to his name. He does have a lot of different intricacies in his game that make him a really good player. But that being said, there are still a lot of things that he's going to have to improve upon, especially to get to that next level. Regarding his jump shot, just being more consistent with that, on all levels, specifically, as a spot up shooter from 3. But that was something that, he's shown steady improvement upon. But definitely from the shot creation and playmaking aspect, there's a long ways to go there. I don't know if he'll ever, get there all the way, but he definitely has potential if he can keep the defensive intangibles up, and hone in on his offense, even marginally to be a very, very good role player in this league. A top end role player, in terms of the high end of my trajectory for him. But this guy, as you guys obviously probably surmised once I said his vertical, is one of the better athletes in the draft. He has great lateral quickness, great verticality, good at staying down a defensive stance. This is a guy that, if things are to come into fruition for him, is going to have, potentially the ability to guard 1 through 5. Now, there are some issues guarding 5s that, adding strength and, as well as, minimizing mistakes when it comes to defensive discipline, especially on, bigger guys, and, just being more locked in, things like that, can definitely increase his ability to do that. But I mean, he can already guard 2 through 4 at a very high clip. I was hesitant to say that he's going to be able to guard ones comfortably at the NBA level, just due to how fast they are coming off screens. And, a lot of those, veteran and really good point guards in the Western Conference, like a Dame Lillard or a Steph Curry, just being able to essentially rise up the second they come off a screen. He may need to increase his lateral quickness from that aspect a little bit, because at the college level, that's just not, I just don't know if there's as much of a athletic difference there. But he is going to be, a guy that has the ability to be a really good point of attack defender, a guy that, if he's able to, hone in on that, the disciplinary aspects of defense, like he kind of already has, to a certain extent in college, defending wings and bigger guards, is really going to be lethal from all areas. He's an extremely good on-ball defender. He has great length. He absorbs contact. He's not really scared to shy away with it. Obviously, Jaren and I kind of called him lengthy, but don't misconstrue that for him also being skinny, because I think that those two have the, ability to kind of get intertwined a little bit. He, isn't definitely the most beefiest guy in the world. Not going to come out here and say that he's, day one, prime Al Horford, in terms of how big he is and everything. But he is a guy that is, really, he does have some good lean muscle mass on him. He's not just a walking stick out there. You can definitely tell he's hit the weight room for sure a little bit in college. He's been listed as high as 230 in some profiles on his pre-draft. I don't know if that's kind of what he was during the season. Maybe kind of looked like he was a little bit bigger during the season, like he's kind of cut some weight since draft time. I don't know if maybe just, really upping the ante in terms of, getting in shape and things like that. But at the NBA Combine, he measured around like 212. I believe that's like without shoes and everything though. So that's, and I don't even know, it could have been like earlier in the day too. So I'd say tentatively he's a guy that I'd comfortably say is probably around 215 to 220, but he might be a guy that, was maybe high up as 230 last year at Marquette. And he's a guy that I think at the NBA level, if he's able to get from where he's at right now, in that 215 to 220 range, to 230 to 235. But, ensuring that a lot more of that is good weight compared to bad weight. He's definitely a guy that is going to be even more tenacious than he already is on defense. He's great at closing the gap on defense, uses his length extremely well. He's a guy that if he kind of, he can stay with you for a whole possession, but at the NBA level, there are very savvy ball handlers, guys that, can do some quick snatchback sort of moves that are tough to stay with. Even in those instances, he closes the gap on his closeouts, even when he's playing one-on-one defense really well. He doesn't give up on plays. He hustles extremely hard. That's obviously a guy that you're always going to want, and especially with the defensive toolbox that you're looking at here with his size. Any NBA team could use a guy like this. He's very light on his feet for his size. I would say he's probably faster and quicker than a lot of wings his size. Even at the NBA level, he has, he just stays kind of on the balls of his feet, stays on his toes, he doesn't really get out of position. He's down in defensive stance. He has, good fundamentals defensively. He's very, gives you really consistent effort on defense too. Like I said, he doesn't really take plays off. I obviously pointed towards a few like disciplinary things that he can fix defensively, but it's definitely not as a result of taking plays off or just not giving effort. It's more so just learning the intricacies of the game. And I mean, he's definitely one of the better defenders in the draft. I'd be hesitant to call him the best defender in the draft because there's some, pretty damn good defenders in this draft. But I would say, both of these guys, and Olivier-Maxence Prosper as well as Dereck Lively, are two of the more highly touted defensive prospects in the draft at the wing and big position, something the Mavericks sorely needed to get two guys, especially a guy in Maxence Prosper, who I think was, definitely, could, pining out to be more of a steal at the end of the day, just due to, some of the variables I talked about earlier that kind of may have slated him where he did in terms of being in that sort of, end of first round area. He's definitely a guy that we could be looking back at a few years from now as a guy that, should have went way higher, especially given, the attitude, the charisma, the character of this guy. It doesn't seem like there's going to be a dull moment with him. He seems like he's going to come in, work and do everything to bolster, the excitement of his teammates and try to get them to work as well. So all those things definitely bode well in terms of, me thinking that he's going to be able to be a guy that can develop into something better offensively, but that's going to be his big drawing point, of course, is getting better offensively. So Jaren, we obviously talked about the immense defensive potential of, Olivier here. He's obviously a guy, I think even at the NBA level, it's going to be able to come in and guard 2 through 4 automatically. And then, 1s and 5s, I would say, sort of, just kind of dependent on the matchup. Maybe if it's Steph Curry, then, obviously there's not many guys at all that can even hinder him. So, guys like that, or like Jokic's or Embiid's, he's going to have a lot more trouble dealing with, a certain point guard or center, just kind of dependent on who they are. But I mean, nonetheless, he in terms of your baseline, level backup point guard, like a Tyus Jones, for instance, a pretty good player. I have confidence that he can defend a guy like that. And that's what makes this guy so versatile, so special. So, Jaren, what do you think that he can improve on offensively to really round out his game holistically? And what is he already good at offensively that maybe some people really don't know about?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a very comfortable jump shot, I would say. Something that needs to be worked on a little bit more. It kind of seems like his offensive game is there. To speak up to your sort of like rawness, what you pointed out, like he's not as raw as anyone thinks, but he still has some raw tangibles, which mainly do fall on the offensive side of the ball. His catch and shoot ability, it's there. You can see the blueprint there. The mechanics are very well put together. It kind of seems like he has built together or put together quite a little jump shot there, one that he's comfortable with. So I don't think there's going to be a total reconstruction of a jump shot or anything in terms of him, at least anytime soon from what I can see, but definitely more of a consistency problem is his deal. I think he shot 33% from 3 last year at Marquette, which wasn't terrible. But on catch and shoot threes, I think it was another like 35%. So numbers that need to be improved. But definitely, the blueprint and the sort of, I guess, foundation is already there. He's got a very, very quick first step off the catch. I mean, he's a guy that he said this sort of, I guess, throughout the interviews, but he's going to attack the paint. I mean, he loves to attack the paint. The only problem is he has very one-dimensional moves. He likes to go to his weak side spin a lot of the time, and with that, he likes to go with the jump hook. It doesn't work all the time. If he could get that jump hook down or go up even a little stronger to the basket, that would be something that at his very peak, maybe his second year in the league, I think I could see him averaging probably 12 to 15 points a game, because if he can get that down, I mean, that would make him one of the more versatile players on this roster already. But yeah, I mean, he likes to go to that weak side jumper, that weak side hook. And like I said, he likes to attack the paint with that first step. He's got a very quick first step. Now, in doing so, as I mentioned with his jump shot, consistency is a big thing. He hesitated a little bit too much, when deciding whether to shoot or whether to attack the basket, which is something that at the pro level, is going to be definitely more, I guess, damaging than, at the collegiate level. So that's something that he's got to get rounded out, which I think throughout his rookie year, he'll definitely find a rhythm or find a sort of, I guess, habit of doing that. And yeah, I mean, just going up stronger with the basket, that's something that I think he needs to get a little better with, especially for what role we think he's going to be, and with, what kind of moves he likes to attack the basket with. This is a guy that could go to the basket very strong. Now, he has some very, very, I guess, strong finishes at the collegiate level. He has multiple posters that, I mean, you look at and you're like, if he could contribute this to the NBA, he would definitely be on the, top 100 dunks of the season sort of list. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I think he's just got to be more consistent at those sort of things. There's really not something that you can point at as being a super negative from what role we think he's going to play. He doesn't need to be a ball handler. He doesn't need to be a dribbler, anything like that. He doesn't really need to even be a playmaker with what sort of role we think he's going to be given. So, we don't really need to expect him to be amazing at these things. Now, he does have to have a foundation of all those things that I just listed, which he does at the collegiate level. But, I think that that's something that, coming into his rookie season, we're not going to expect him to be, amazing at, like I said. So I think, offensively, it's much more raw compared to his defensive intangibles, as you listed before. But the foundations are there. The blueprints are there, as I said before. And yeah, I mean, he could be a very good catch and shoot guy. I mean, I think combining defense and hopefully his offense contributes to the professional level, but he could be a better wing than, he could be the best wing on the roster right now. I mean, Reggie had such a decline from last year that I don't think that's something that, some people should pop their eyes at saying. I think that's probably a very real statement. Depending on what we do in free agency, we could be
Also, I would also say I'd push back that it would also kind of depend on if you view Josh Green as more of a winger guard.
Yeah, I view him more as a 2 guard or a 3 that can handle the ball. I don't view him as a strict wing. I view our strict wings as Reggie and now Omax. But yeah, I mean, I think that Omax has the ability to leap over Reggie in terms of minutes or even role on this roster. So it's going to be some interesting things to see. But offensively, like I said, there's things that need to be worked around. But the foundation and the blueprint, like I said a million times now, is there. He's got a very good mechanical jump shot, a very quick first step, just needs to be more consistent, better decision making. And I think everything kind of will come align with sort of, I guess everything will align, his negatives or whatever, they'll align. And we'll see throughout his rookie season. I think that we'll learn a lot through summer league because again, this is a guy that up until he was pretty much drafted by the Mavericks, he was kind of under our radar. So I know that me and Will will probably learn a lot about what this player could be at the summer league level. But I mean, like I said, he's I mean, everything's good. He's a good shooter for what he is. I think he shot 70% from the free throw line or somewhere around there.
It was in the low
last
70s.
season. Yeah, exactly. So low 70s, and that's a very indicative number of sort of true shooting, quote for quote. So I think we're gonna get a guy, like I said, who's gonna be very conducive to a role. But he's comfortable in doing that. That's kind of what we sort of heard through that pre-draft process and through that interview process that we just listened to yesterday. Now we'll get more into ceiling and floor and things like that and what he could be. But at least right now through his rookie season, I think he's going to be much more role indicative, or I guess conduced. And yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be a guy. Whenever we drafted him, I thought that he would be kind of a G League guy in and out, sort of what Jaden Hardy was last year, where he'd kind of bloom late in the season. But now I'm looking at it, and especially with how this roster is currently. Granted, we're filming this on June 27th, which is 3 days prior to free agency, so we don't know what we're going to be doing here. But pre-free agency, this guy, I mean, he could be maybe not starter, but he could be a guy who's for sure coming off the bench and producing big numbers for the Mavericks.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna just depend on how ready-made he is day one, and like Jaren and I have sort of talked about some of these intangibles. Definitely would kind of hint at him being a guy that could be an established guy at the end of a bench, or be a ninth man in a rotation on a decent team, day one, right? But some of these things, just depending on how some of these swing factors, I guess, end up swinging at the pro level, will kind of affect how much of an immediate impact he can have day one as a rookie. Maybe a few more things if we want to get into it that we just didn't kind of really get to hit the nail on the head here, just in terms of his game last year before we get into comparisons and stuff like that. His off-ball defense is also extremely good. There were matchups specifically when in that Marquette defense that he kind of had to play the 5, or he was one of the bigger guys out there next to only one other big, which was a lot of the time where he had to rotate over as the low man and have to try and guard the rim. And he did experience some trouble with that. Despite his length and how pestering he is, he only had 5 blocks on the entire season. Something for a guy of his caliber, that's definitely going to need to increase. The defensive, quickness, the defensive intangibles are all there, but maybe just having a little bit of finishing aspect on defense in the same vein that he kind of does on offense when he's dunking over people, to finish some plays a little bit harder. Also just adding strength. He honestly, he was kind of slow to react a couple times when having to rotate over as the low man and defend the rim against guys that are, coming downhill at him. But of course that's not, essentially his natural identity anyway. So that's something that he'll definitely have a lot of time to improve upon at the NBA level because, especially if he adds a little bit of strength, he'll definitely have the size to do that on occasion, just kind of depending on who it is. But it'll be interesting to see if he can actually develop upon that and, make that a tangible skill going forward. In regards to his jump shot, as Jaren talked about, though, I mean, the process is there. He has a really good high release point. He's improved his mechanics a ton since he first came in to the collegiate level, playing at Clemson that freshman year. And, numbers aside, he did shoot a fairly high volume of threes last year. Shot one of the most amount of threes on that Marquette squad. And I think he has potential to be a very good spot up shooter, especially as he develops. He's a guy that, maybe, growing up just because of his length and the awkwardness, probably with how long his arms are, that maybe have hindered his jump shot going forward. But he's definitely figuring things out. His process is really good. And the good thing about a lot of his misses is that they were very fixable. You could tell that he kind of, didn't really capitalize on his follow through. He sort of maybe pushed the ball with his thumb a little bit and also didn't get his legs into a shot in a lot of his misses. And that is extremely encouraging in terms of how that's going to be able to project with his jump shot. As Jaren also said, he's a great finisher coming downhill. He does have those moments where he gets the ball on the wing, sort of hesitates, doesn't know if he's going to shoot or drive, but there were a few draft profiles that said he didn't have the best first step, and I think that they were specifically kind of referencing that, but he does have, in my opinion, a really fast first step, and he can honestly even make it a little bit better if he elongates it a little bit more and is just more directionally sound instead of, kind of wasting space going to the side at all. But when he gets going, he does have very long strides when he runs in transition, runs really hard, and, he can finish over the top of people. I wouldn't say that he's the most savvy finisher in terms of having a variety of moves that he's able to kind of go to. He's not a guy that's, busting out the seams with Eurosteps and jellies off the backboard, from under the rim. He's not gonna, possess a whole lot of suave to his finishing, but it's very contact based. He goes very hard downhill into people. He's not an easy sort of specimen to stop. And I mean, he finishes well through contact. He has a really good touch around the basket. So I think that that's definitely something at the NBA level that he can improve upon a little bit in terms of being a little bit more dynamic, especially with how strong some guys are, with the rim protectors in the NBA. He may not be able to finish over the top of them always. But that is definitely, going to be something that I don't think is going to be too much of a, improvement point. I think it's something that, will come in fairly naturally. And, best of all, he's a great cutter. Showed great instincts on backdoor and 45 cuts specifically. Just really savvy, even when there's not a play drawn up. He just understands his own offensive spacing very well, and knows when to cut, a lot of end of the shot clock cuts. So he's a guy that can alleviate a lot of pressure from that perspective. As big as he is, you would also kind of hope that he's a better rebounder. He does have, instances where he kind of gets himself a little bit out of position. He had about 5 rebounds a game last year, but he hasn't really, had an opportunity to showcase that, his first 2 collegiate years where he didn't really play as much. So that'll be interesting to see if it'll evolve going forward, especially if he adds some size to him. It could definitely be something where he's able to add a lot from that perspective because he has the size and the intangibles to be a really good rebounder on both sides of the ball. And, kind of like what I talked about when I said he was a really good off-ball defender. I mean, he's a guy that can switch on to anybody. He almost, takes on mismatch it. If it's a mismatch with a guard or a center, he doesn't shy away from it in any capacity. He almost takes it on as a challenge. He switches onto screens on the guards really fast, tries to, almost poke the ball away the second they get it to, just make it a even more difficult possession, see if he can do something. Is really rotationally sound, is not going to be a guy that's getting caught up, lost in space a lot, is a good screen navigator both on and off ball. And I mean, you do get really just the full sort of complement, of the modern NBA wing, lengthy defender who can defend multiple positions with this guy. And, the only really knock I have on his defense, like I said, is maybe being able to get a little bit quicker laterally at the pro level to defend some point guards, and, being a little bit more disciplined, really strictly in terms of guarding big men and, rotating over as the low man. But he is a guy that is good at picking off passing lanes. And when he's playing naturally at that wing spot, he's very comfortable as an off-ball defender. A guy that closes out really hard, not much knocks on his game from, an intangible, from a discipline aspect. There. So he doesn't just have these, this really good size and everything. He also has, the intangibles as well, which is definitely a rare commodity for a player of his size. That's why these guys are so kind of coveted in the NBA, the OG Anunobis of the world, guys like that, right? Otherwise, like Jaren and kind of aforementioned, there are a lot of things that he'll definitely need to improve on that aren't necessarily conducive to the position that he's going to play with the Mavericks. This is definitely going to be a guy that, at the low end of things, maybe takes a little time to develop. Maybe, spend some time in the G League. That's kind of buried on the, the back half of the roster. But he projects as, in my opinion, as a guy that could be inside that, top 8-10 of the rotation day one, potentially move himself up a tick or two, even just depending on how good he plays this year. And, he doesn't have to do some of these things that he was probably relied more a little heavily on, at Marquette, where he was essentially their best player. He can play a little bit more with inside a role. He's eager to do that. In the, post-draft interviews, with Dallas media, he talked very highly of Christian Braun and his time with the Nuggets last year, and, how he would like to be able to, fill in and be that guy that can fill in certain stop gaps and, be a sort of all-encompassing utility player, do all the hard things, all the little things. So, his teammates can prosper around him. Hence the last name Prosper. Actually, no pun intended. I know that sucked, but this guy definitely, has what it takes to be, a tried and true role player for the Mavericks next year. And, some of the things that he needs to improve a lot upon in his game aren't really detrimental to him being a good role player in the league. They may be detrimental to how big his sort of star power potential is, and how big, maybe some of these swing factors could end up, working out for him in terms of how long his career ends up being, or and just how good he becomes. And, that's mainly his playmaking and his shot creation. He averaged less than an assist per game in every year that he was in college. Even on the catch, he wasn't necessarily the most dynamic guy at finding cutters coming downhill. He does get kind of tunnel vision to an extent. And in those one-on-one scenarios, he's looking to use his size just to get to the basket. So, being able to, be a little bit more than just, kind of a ball mover, and also, being safer with the ball, especially from a ball handling aspect. He averaged 1.4 turnovers a game last year, which, isn't a whole lot. It is a little bit more amplified because it is in college and they only play 40 minutes, especially since he averaged more turnovers than assists. But there's a lot of rawness from that perspective, and it's not something that we're necessarily expecting him to do. It's not like, Josh Green, where it's a guy who, is a little smaller and has to be a little bit more dynamic passing wise, or, could fill that role potentially. This is a guy that doesn't really need to do those things as much, as much as he kind of just needs to stick to his role, cut, and spot up, as well as attack off closeouts. But if he can be a guy that, can attack off a closeout and be able to kick out to shooters on the wing, or find cutters coming downhill, at the bare minimum, adding at least just a, sort of pseudo playmaking aspect to his game, or a guy, that at any point in his career is able to, expand his dribble bag, which albeit is fairly limited, more so than it already is. Add different stop and go measures to that, add a lot more dynamic dribbling, and just in terms of like how fancy it is, and, with that, just being able to create space for guys, and for himself. He's kind of slower when he tries to go to it between the legs or behind the back dribble at the point of attack when he's, really trying to blow past the guy. I got stripped a few times. So, stuff like that. I mean, that's obviously going to be a huge improvement point for him. But if he can hit upon that, as well as the things that he's already good at, this is definitely, a guy where the sky is kind of the limit. I would, describe, him to Mavs fans or listeners of the podcast that maybe don't know too much about him, that maybe listen to some of our other draft profiles where, we talked about some of the higher guys up in that range. I would say he's almost like a Bilal Coulibaly, with, maybe a little less potential, a little less ball handling potential, stuff like that. But, defensively, and just in terms of his intangibles, and, he even has some better size than Bilal. He's a guy that, could end up, being up there in that same range where, guys were picked 7th, even 8th in the draft, were slated in terms of, how good he is going forward, when this all ends up panning out. So, immense potential, but there's a lot of swing factors that will really end up turning the tide of his career in terms of, him being a fringe star to, just a role player. So I guess we'll go ahead and blow through these, comparisons really quickly. Jaren, I listed a few obviously right here. Did you have any in mind, that maybe weren't on this list, or that, if there's one that you were really thinking between any of the guys that I listed, that are most comparable to Omax?
No, I think that you probably honestly covered it. I mean, if you want, I can go ahead and list them. Jared Vanderbilt, Jaden,
I did think of one other guy as the podcast was sort of going, but I may have just forgot him here. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I thought of one other, and then I kind of just forgot as what. So I was just like, all right, we'll go with it. But yeah, I mean, Jared Vanderbilt, the McDaniels brothers, and then sort of his height, his ceiling would be a kind of a pseudo Jeremy Grant, in my opinion. So, in your opinion, I mean, that's what you listed. So,
yeah, no, that's what I put for a ceiling would be current day Jeremy Grant, especially if he could develop a, sort of semblance of a mid-range jump shot and a post-up game, because he does tend to go, to that a lot, but it's just not too consistent. He kind of shies away. As good as he is from finishing through contact, he almost shies away from going to contact sometimes, which is interesting. So that if he gets a lot better offensively, he could definitely turn out to be that. And at the low end, I put he'd kind of just be a really rangy wing off the bench. You can do some different things, but it's only kind of periodically or in flashes. And it's just not consistent enough. And that, at the low end, I said that he would be Haywood Highsmith. Haywood Highsmith obviously had a really good playoff run, but, I'm more so kind of alluding towards his time in the regular season. So I kind of project him around there, in terms of his floor or his ceiling. There are a couple other maybe NBA comparisons that we can get into. But barring that, that's about what you're looking at with this player. And I mean, add current day Jeremy Grant to this Mavericks roster. And I mean, look at the type of team that you're looking at in terms of, how important this guy is and the sort of young core the Mavericks are building at the moment.
Yeah, I honestly think that probably covers sort of what we could see, or, potentially what we could see. So, I mean,
I remembered my other comparison from earlier.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I feel like if he taps into more of a, if he ends up being a guy that's a little bit more sound, that can guard down, and, he really hones into his lateral quickness. I think that he could kind of end up, being an OG and an Anunoby type. I don't know if he'll ever get that dynamic offensively, with the passing and, his ability to attack, but I could see him kind of being a guy like that. He's, his offensive and defensive game is a little bit more predicated on speed. But, conversely, I could also see him kind of being like Jeremy Grant. So it's just kind of depending on where his career trajectory irons out. But that's the sort of things that you're looking at the high end. On the low end, of course, your average sort of lengthy role player off the bench, like a Haywood Highsmith. So yeah, that's really all I got.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably covers, that sense of things. I guess just to sort of harp on his role a little bit more. You know, I mean, coming into his rookie season, I like what you said, where he could be kind of a guy coming off the bench, doesn't necessarily play every game or play the most minutes in a game, but he would probably be an 8 to 10 kind of rotational guy. I could see him, like you said, spending some time in the G League. I don't think he's a guy that spends much time, or even if any time at all. Just depending on, you know, sort of what kind of development needs he kind of gets into, but
Also, probably like how many more wings the Mavericks get this offseason.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. You know, depending on free agency, I think I touched on that a little bit whenever I was talking about his offensive game. But yeah, I mean, depending on free agency, you know, it kind of depends on what sort of role he gets. But as of right now, like I said, in June 27th, he's the second sort of wing that we have, 3/4 guy that we have. So I mean, he's going to be a big minute kind of guy if we finalize the roster as of today. Which, you know, of course, we don't expect that to happen, but. Yeah, I mean, you know, high potential, getting into his role, of course, our rookie year. I think he's kind of an 8 to 10 guy coming off the bench. And you know, he could be sort of a spark plug kind of guy. I mean, you know, we don't really know what he's going to get because we don't know what this roster is going to look like. But we can only make predictions. And to me, I think he's going to be like that Christian Braun sort of spark plug kind of player, guy who, you know, comes in, does the little things right. Necessarily doesn't have the biggest impact offensively and or defensively, but you know, in terms of effort plays, you know, effort plays, and I guess just more defensive minded things. Like, you know, we're probably going to see him have his biggest impacts on that side of the ball. I mean, Will, do you think that probably covers his role coming into the rookie season?
Yeah, I mean,
depending on what the roster looks like.
I think regardless of what ends up the Mavericks do with the roster, you know, whether he starts as a guy who is not even getting minutes at first, or, you know, is kind of at the back half of the rotation, or even a guy who, you know, is potentially even the 7th or 8th man. I do think that, just depending on how fast his developmental track goes, I mean, he could definitely easily sort of, you know, stamp himself inside the top echelon of the rotation, maybe not necessarily starting. I mean, you never know. He could start some games, but I could see this guy being a fringe starter or, you know, one of the first few guys off the bench, you know, his rookie year, depending on how some of those swing factors end up ironing out. But I just think that we need to, you know, have a healthy diagnosis in terms of our expectations for him. I don't think we should expect that, but at the high ends of things, that is where I could, you know, see him going even as far as next year, just given, you know, how savvy this guy is defensively, especially if the shot improves going into his rookie year. I don't know about you, if you think he can do that, you know, going into next year or not.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that, I mean, assuming everything does go right, his developmental track is, I guess, a lot less than what we think it's going to be. I mean, he could potentially be that. He could potentially be that sort of 8 or 7 man off the bench and produce, you know, big time minutes in a big time playoff game. Again, I mean, this is all speculation, and you know, we don't know what this roster is going to look like in 4 days from now, but or I guess 3 days from now. But yeah, I mean, this is only speculation, and that I think that he has the potential to be that. I think kind of conversely, talking about some of the smaller guys that won't have a bigger segment, that being I forget, you know, Mike Miles Jr. and then
no, do we want to do a boom bust rating for Omax?
Oh yeah, let's run by that. My bad.
I'll explain it really quickly.
Yeah.
So for those of you that haven't listened to any of our draft profiles or are just now finding us after the draft is over, the boom bust rating that we do for our draft prospects over here at the Mainstream Mavs podcast is essentially a volatility rating. So we're essentially diagnosing how much this prospect either could potentially, you know, blossom into a star, but also at the other end, you know, fizzle out into, you know, a guy who's not in the NBA anymore, or an undrafted player, you know, or, you know, a guy who is barely seeing minutes, something like that, right? So that's essentially what it is. It's not basic. It's not really saying whether they will be a boom or a bust or not, more as if it's, you know, rating how much their potential is to kind of go on either ends of those spectrum. So I think for Omax, if we're rating it out of 10 here, I would probably put him at maybe, I would probably say about a 6.5.
That's exactly what I was going, 6 or 7.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I mean, there you go. Me and Jaren have actually matched on one of those. We're usually like 1 or 2 off, but that one we're right on target with, because I think he does have some good, you know, sort of upwinding potential. But I also don't think his floor is absolutely horrendous. I said about a Haywood Highsmith, but I mean, look, that's still a guy that can come and contribute, especially at least during the regular season. So I think at, baseline level, he's at least going to be that for a few years. And, maybe if that's all he ever is in his career, he'll probably, fizzle out of the league when his athleticism leaves him. But I mean, I still do think he could be a lot more than that, especially with, how high character a guy he is. But yeah, Jaren, if you want to go ahead and, talk about Mike Miles Jr. These aren't going to be full-fledged profiles, of course. And, University of Alabama Birmingham guard Jordan Walker. Then, the floor is yours. Just kind of talk about what they could maybe bring to the Mavericks Summer League team a little bit. And, if you think that these guys, specifically in Walker's case where he doesn't have as much guarantee of being on the roster as Miles does with that two-way spot, let us know if you think that these could be guys that could actually, come in and, relieve some sort of, tertiary ball handling for the Mavericks if anybody gets hurt or, they actually end up, making the team or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike Miles, I'll touch up on him first because we have the most information on him. I mean, according to NBA Draft Room, I mean, he was ranked the 7th best guard in this, draft, which out of 12 isn't the best, but I mean, he's rated higher than Jalen Pickett and Marquise Noel, which of course Jalen Pickett was drafted with a 2nd overall pick. I forget where he went, but he was drafted. Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who's going to bring more of a leadership role to that point guard spot. He did play for the U19 FIBA team, Team USA. And I mean, from what I can see, I don't think he started or anything like that. But coming off the bench, I mean, this is a guy that is going to give you some leadership characteristics. He's not going to do everything perfectly. More of kind of a stretch guard in the sense that, he's a smaller guy, but he can stretch the floor a little bit with his shot. I think there's more consistency problems there than anything. Is just, can he develop more of a consistent outside shot? I mean, he only stands at 6'1", so kind of smaller in today's NBA. But yeah, I mean,
Some people
the characteristics,
6'2",
6'2", 6'1".
Yeah.
I mean, still smaller in today's NBA, but still, I mean, this is a guy who, characteristics aside, I mean, it's more about what can he do intangibly, or what can he do to find an identity throughout this league, which, I'm not saying he can't, but I mean, at TCU, he kind of did a little bit of everything, including leadership. And that's kind of his big sort of calling card was his leadership alone. And, at TCU, he led them, I think, to the round of 32 or Sweet 16 2 years in a row, I think. I could be wrong with that, but I do know that he led TCU to a pretty good season this last season. And, he was kind of that sort of older guy on that squad. He wasn't even older. I think he was a sophomore or a junior, but sort of older guy throughout the other sort of guys on that roster. But yeah, I mean, it's more leadership characteristics, a good playmaker. He's looking to get his teammates involved. Offensively has a good outside shot and good playmaking abilities. And defensively, I think he just has a good average all around defensive game whenever he's guarding 1 through 2s. He's a stronger guard, which, does have his upside. He can finish. He looks for contact. I do know that. He's a very
he has
strong
good
finisher.
athleticism for somebody his
Yeah,
size.
for
I mean,
6'2", 6'1", he does have good.
I wouldn't say it's like elite. He's definitely not projecting as like like a Russell Westbrook or anything like that at the point guard position. But he's a guy that can go up there and finish when need be. Threw down a few dunks last year. Like I think you said, Jaren, like you said, he's a really good, sound basketball player. Is good, pretty solid defense. His main drawing point is definitely his playmaking and his ability to set others up, in the pick and roll, stuff like that. His ability to get better, I think, is really going to be conducive to his shot creation, his ability to get to his own spots, and finish over guys. That's obviously something where, he kind of had to lead TCU in that aspect, but it's also, part of the reason that he wasn't, higher up on draft boards, was just he's not as dynamic as, a lot of the other guys in this class at, being able to, sort of furbish his own shot creation and, make tough shots over defenders, in the mid-range area as well from three, something that is almost, quintessential to your being, as a small guard coming out of college, trying to make the NBA. So, he has some markers that he's definitely going to have to hit. He's definitely not bad at, his shot creation or anything like that. There's just a lot of things that he'll have to fine tune. be better than average at to really hit at the next level. But he could definitely be a role player that helps. And depending on how much he develops, I'd be interested to see if he got any minutes with the Mavericks next year, because he'll be with the Legends a lot. But at the same time, this is a guy that, is one of the more highly coveted undrafted players. If the Mavericks do have a sort of lack of ball handling there that they maybe didn't even plan for as they, prepare the offseason and, some of the offseason moves that have already been made, of course, with the draft, have been hyper focused on defense. If they neglect ball handling altogether, especially playmaking, something that, necessarily isn't Jaden Hardy's strong suit, even though he is a pretty good ball handler, and shot creator. Mike Miles is a guy that, in the same sort of sense of that kind of like McKinley Wright did last year, I think could step in and get a few minutes for the Mavericks this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, at his very peak, he could be a guy that, produces some sort of role in the NBA. But, absolutely, I think that, he can come in and, produce some sort of leadership. I think it'll be fun seeing him come off the bench. He's not going to play necessarily the most minutes, of course, being on a two-way, but seeing him come off the bench or even at the Legend or with the Legends, I should say, seeing him sort of, I guess, like sort of dictate his way, getting teammates involved. It's going to be fun to watch. I think that he's going to be really fun to watch. If he does get a role in the NBA, I think it'll be fun to watch him kind of become a lob threat or a playmaking lob threat, because I think he can be one of the better guys at doing that. But to touch up on Jordan, what's his name? Jordan Walker. Jordan Walker a little bit. Yeah. I mean, just more of I don't know much about him, but I do know, coming from the conference that he's from, I mean, me and you, Will, we're going to UNTE in the fall, and they are, of course, Conference USA. So we got very accustomed to Conference USA basketball sort of over the month of March, especially with the late run that Florida Atlantic went on in that March Madness tournament. And I mean, I can only say this, being I think he was the 21 or 22 National Player of the Year, or 21 and 22 National Player of the Year in Conference USA. I mean, he's a guy that, doesn't have the most size on him, doesn't have the best intangibles, probably isn't the best basketball player on the court, but he's going to come out there. He's going to work hard. And, I think he's only 5'11" or 6 foot, somewhere around there. And, he's a very good finisher from the sort of small highlight reel that I saw, a good finisher with size, a very good outside shot. His offensive game is very well-rounded, as it should be for a smaller guard. I think the intangibles side is going to be kind of his size. How much does that limit him?
Yeah.
Especially defensively, how much is he limited there? I think it's kind of similar to McKinley Wright, where I guess I don't really know what his defense kind of looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I know
Wright,
he's a faster individual, but I don't know if he's as stout as McKinley Wright. He definitely looked like he was a little more like thinner framed. McKinley Wright's like he's a big 5'11".
Exactly.
He's got a plus 6 foot wingspan, like well above plus 6 foot. I think it's around that like 6'2", 6'3" area. I don't know for sure, but he also is like almost like 190. He's got a lot of muscle on him. So Jordan Walker, I think I saw he was more around like 170 or so. Obviously he's in a weaker conference, so that carryover to the NBA, I think, is obviously a lot more questionable. Had he been doing some of the things that he did in Conference USA, I'd say a Power 5, even at his size, I think it would have probably have, been shed upon a brighter light, especially when a guy like Marquise Noel, who, who's 3 inches shorter than that. He's only 5'8", was a guy that was one of the first undrafted free agents off the board to the Raptors on that 2-way deal or whatever. So, it's going to be interesting with Walker. I mean, he's kind of like a 5'11" Steph Curry almost in terms of how he played in Conference USA last year, but by no means am I comparing him to that, like actually as a player, but just in terms of what you'd be looking at, in terms of the intangibles there. If you go under on a screen, he can punish you, but seeing how he'll hold up defensively, as well as if he'll even be able to kind of see over guys from a playmaking perspective and still be able to do that at the same effective rate as he did in college, and seeing how effective the scoring will be against NBA level talent and size is going to be the big thing for him. But he performed well enough in a lower classification Division I conference last year to where he's earned himself a shot in the NBA. And I mean, it'll kind of just go as far as the sort of shooting and shot creation take him, because that's the main focal point of his game at his size. Otherwise, having touched up on those guys, especially Mike Miles Jr., who's on a 2-way contract for the Mavericks. Is there any, other sort of stuff that you want to touch up on the pod? I know we kind of talked about the draft interviews or the post-draft interviews with Lively and Omax at the post-draft press conference the Mavericks had the other day. Throughout the podcast, sort of referencing different stuff, but it was more lighthearted in nature. And, both of those guys, like I said, were very good interviewees, and they stuck to the script of what the PR team was probably wanting them to say the whole time. Threw in a few jokes for sure, though. Omax, saying, that he was 9 or 10 when Jason Kidd went to the finals. And then Dereck Lively, his facial expression after Omax said he could speak 5 languages was pretty fun. Omax can speak Haitian, Spanish, French, and English, I believe. So,
and Korean.
Korean.
Yeah, I think that was the last one.
Oh, geez, I didn't even hear that one.
Yeah, it was 5.
I thought it was 4. I
believe it was 5.
I thought it was like 5 at first, or like somebody said 5 on accident. I don't know. I'll have to look it up. But Korean is wild. I gotta fact check that one.
I know he's a big anime guy, which Korean.
I do know he's a big anime guy. But yeah, if he can speak Korean too, that's outside of any sort of realm that I would have projected for him. Just given where he's come from and his background. So that would be very impressive if he could do that as well, because he would have had to have literally learned that on his own. But he played in he was at the NBA Mexico City Academy, so that's kind of where he learned Spanish and stuff. And then Haitian, and I think that's kind of conducive to his heritage and stuff. And I think the French was a kind of just a product of him growing up in Montreal or the surrounding area or whatever it was in Canada. And obviously English is you basically have to learn that if you're going to the NBA, and he played college at the States. So it's really impressive to have to have gone through that much adaptability in your life and still be as high character, high charisma as a guy as he is. He's very beloved already, having been here for a few days. And just the way the kid talks. I know we talked about the Christian Braun quote and stuff, but you got to love him from that perspective, and how hard of a worker he seems like he's poised to be, and how much he's willing to fit with inside a role. That's kind of my 2 cents on him from that perspective. If you want to talk about Dereck Lively a little bit more, we could definitely do that in terms of how he fared during the interview. But I thought Nico and J Kidd, they were pretty rudimentary in the interview. Maybe we can kind of talk about how Nico said that they would both be good compliments to Kyrie if Kyrie were to return, but I don't think he was really hinting at too much there. The whole jersey predicament at the end was interesting because it got announced that Dereck Lively is going to wear number 2, which if you guys obviously don't know, Kyrie Irving wore last year. Kyrie Irving, he's going to be switching back to his sort of A11 even little promotion thing that he has going on. Going to switch back to the number 11 to honor his ancestors, things of that nature. You guys can find more about that on his Instagram and stuff like that. But honestly, I'm kind of hyped. I don't know why, but I feel like 11 kind of suits him in the in a Mavs uniform a little bit more. It gives me some Monte vibes. So I'm excited for that. And Tim Hardaway Jr. will be switching back to 10, if he is to come back. And take all of these with a grain of salt, of course. I'm not saying that Kyrie and Tim are definitively coming back because of these jersey things, because it was agreed upon after the Brooklyn trade, if they were to come back. But Tim Hardaway Jr. will be going back to 10 now that Kyrie's at 11 to honor his dad. But, with that being said, I don't know how much credence I'm going to give to the jerseys being a surefire sort of tell-all that that Kyrie and Tim are going to be back for sure, especially Tim. But I would say it definitely has increased the probability of both of them staying by quite a bit. And in Tim's case, I think it went from almost he was likely to not be a Maverick to like more like 60-40, maybe even 50-50. He's going to be a Maverick at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sort of jersey news caught everyone maybe not off guard, but definitely caught some eyes And listening to the interview, I'd kind of already expected it, but yeah, I mean, I think it's very cool. As you said, Kyrie definitely looks a lot better in a number 11 uniform, in my opinion. And Dereck Lively, the second, wearing number 2 is only fitting. DL2, I think that's a very cool sort of nickname or sort of congested name, whatever it is. And yeah, of course, Omax wearing 18. I mean, these are all very like cool numbers. 18 though definitely looks weird in a Mavericks uniform. I will not lie to you. I just don't think we have seen very many 18s come up in the Dallas Mavericks sort of history realm.
You die, Baba.
Yeah, there you go. But I mean, outside of that, I really don't have anything. Dereck Lively, again, for a 19-year-old, I mean, he's younger than me. For him to be so poised and so sort of, I guess, mature in a way, definitely caught me off guard. He has very little, sort of, I guess, very, very little childish techniques. I mean, he's a good, like, sort of guy who's going to come into the room and sort of make a light out of nothing. But I mean, outside of that, I really got nothing else to say.
No, I mean, yeah, but they're definitely like very two high character guys. And, even though Dereck Lively is obviously a guy that's very mature for his age, he still talked about how he is a guy that can, come in and, shed a bright light upon the room and still joke around and stuff. And that was very indicative in those interviews. And, it just only upped the ante in terms of, how they'll be able to, be able to contribute to the Mavericks next year. And, these are not necessarily two guys that are penciled in as starters, but they talked, a bit about roles with Nico and Jay Kidd at dinner, the night before. I know they had all went out. They talked about that. And, as far as Dereck Lively goes, obviously, this kind of goes without saying. We can kind of cover his role real quick now that he's actually on the Mavericks. But it's all going to be conducive to what the Mavericks do, in the coming days, right? If they go out and actually pull off this trade with DeAndre Ayton, then yeah, Dereck Lively is definitely going to be relegated to being the backup big for, the ensuing next couple of years. But if the Mavericks, take more of the bullpen approach from center, he could definitely end up starting. And, depending on how steadfast he is in his development, maybe be a surefire starter. Maybe while, at start, there may be certain matchups that they choose to play him against, certain matchups they don't. But, Jaren and I are going to, be releasing these podcasts simultaneously. The off-season podcasts, where we're just going to kind of do a free agency rumor mill sort of news roundup. So you guys will hear all our thoughts on the DeAndre Ayton thing. But I think Dereck Lively right now, in terms of if the roster was finalized today, would be forced to start. I would say that he's probably the best big on the team. Maybe Rashawn Holmes in certain matchups. I mean, maybe he's like the open night starter, but I think eventually Lively wins that spot over if I'm just projecting, even if he's maybe not ready for it because of, some of the, aspects of his game that he's going to need to improve on, just in terms of the rawness offensively, being able to set screens, be a little bit more dynamic as to not just be a strict rim runner. But the defensive upside right now that he has and the potential, shooting as well as the lob threat and his ability to, be very feisty on putbacks and tenacious and, rebounding and be a guy that can be a lob threat in the dunker spot. I mean, stuff like that kind of, puts him in a position as highly touted as he was getting selected, number 12 overall to be a guy that I think could start. Now he will have some woes and it may not be necessarily the best thing for a team in the Mavericks position as competitive as they are in certain games, but certain games I could definitely see him blossom. So I think his role with the Mavericks as of right now is definitely going to be a starter. But that is obviously subject to change depending on if the Mavericks want another big man. We'll talk more tonight about if we agree with the Mavericks approach to that and what we think they should do in regards to going to get more wings or going to get more bigs. But I would say it's about a 50-50 chance, just kind of depending on what the Mavericks do with free agency. If they want to get a, surefire sort of stopgap center for the next couple years to, bring Lively up to speed and before they're, able to decide between the two, then they could do that. Or they could, just add maybe one more veteran center, consolidate, maybe McGee, let Dwight go, round out the rotation a little bit more. So you get a little bit of a certain pop from different guys and, let Lively spearhead it. But I think between everybody right now, especially given his youth, I think he would be the current starter day one right now for the Mavericks. Do you have any objections to that, Jaren?
No, absolutely not. I think, I mean, basically what you said about both those guys I think is going to be true. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. Well, we'll be back to cover that free agency rumor news mill sort of roundup. We were hoping to do it right after this podcast, but we're going to have to wait a few hours and release this one tonight, unfortunately, just due to some pre-existing circumstances. But nonetheless, we appreciate you guys for listening this far in the episode. Make sure to follow us at Twitter at Mainstream214. We're trying to build our following back up over there. Trying to get you guys to, really promote the Twitter, get it back up and popping like it was. We'd really appreciate if you give us a follow over there. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, comment down below. Will Dereck Lively II be starting day one opening night for the Mavericks or not? Comment down below. Also, if you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other podcast platform, make sure to give us a good review. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and turn on those post noties so you guys can be notified when we drop podcasts. Turn them on Twitter as well. But, we'd really appreciate any feedback that you guys could give us. And, following our podcast would mean the world. So whatever listening platform you're on, we're on Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, almost anything as well. So just get at us on there. We're welcoming to any feedback, even if it, be negative. So barring that, we appreciate you guys for listening to the podcast. It's been a good one, and we will catch you guys back later tonight, and we'll release both of these.
Happy birthday, Grimace.